Quick, run! Faster!
Stop showing off! Lyanna!
My Aunt Lyanna. I've seen her statue in the crypt. My father never talked about her.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back for another Game of Thrones Season 8 prediction video. Lately, I've been thinking about making a video on Arya Stark because I'm still trying to decide how her story will end. I have thought about this topic a lot, and I've already made some videos on this in the past, but I'm still wondering if there is something that I missed. Now that I've been trying to see things from a different angle, whenever I think about Arya Stark, there is usually only two ways I can see her story ending, and I think some of this is due to her comparisons with Lyanna Stark. These two characters have led very different lives, but I can't help but wonder if they will face a similar fate. I think the very first video I made about Arya Stark was when I talked about some things that I saw as foreshadowing for her death. Then I made another video about Arya and Gendry getting together. Now I know that is a very popular topic, but I believe I was the first channel to make the Arya and Gendry prediction video. Now that I am talking about this again, I still feel like those are my two main thoughts about how I can see her story ending. She's either going to die very young, or she will finally see the light and decide to settle down, and possibly start a family of her own, or at the very least, enter some kind of a relationship. Like I have said before, if Arya would happen to die in the books, I believe she could live her second life through her direwolf Nymeria. But that's obviously not as likely to happen in the show because they never did introduce her warging abilities. Now, when trying to decide how Arya Stark's story will end, we can go all the way back to the very beginning of this story to see how some of the pieces were being put in place. Arya had a conversation with her father, Ned Stark, and they talked about her future. Ned told Arya that one day she would marry a High Lord and rule his castle, and their sons would be knights and princes. But Arya said, "No, that's not me."
You will marry a High Lord and rule this castle. And your sons shall be knights and princes and lords.
No. That's not me.
At the time, Arya had no intentions of living her life as a lady, like her sister Sansa wanted to. Ever since Arya told her father that, she really hasn't shown any signs of settling down and having a family. So it seems like Arya will never live that kind of a life. Whenever people talk about Arya Stark and her future, they usually base it on what Arya said in that scene, because she said she never wanted to get married and have kids, so we tend to take her word for it. But how do we know what Ned said won't come true? How do we know that Ned wasn't foreshadowing Arya's future when he said she would get married and have kids? As a child, Arya is a lot like her aunt Lyanna Stark. There are several different quotes in the books that compare these two characters. There was another time Arya had a conversation with Ned, and he compared her to Lyanna twice. This was when Ned discovered that Arya had a sword, Needle, and this is what he said. Arya, you have a wildness in you, child. The wolf blood, my father used to call it. Lyanna had a touch of it, and my brother Brandon more than a touch. It brought them both to an early grave. As you can see, Arya is a lot like Lyanna as a child. They were both tough, who like to get dirty and fight, and ride horses and things like that. Ned knows that Arya has this wolf's blood too, and he says that it led to an early grave for Lyanna, so let's just hope it doesn't mean the same for Arya. But perhaps this is foreshadowing Arya's fate. During this same conversation, Ned also says Lyanna might have carried a sword, if my lord father had allowed it. You remind me of her sometimes. You even look like her. When Ned says this, Arya doesn't really think so because people said Lyanna was beautiful, and no one ever said Arya was beautiful. In fact, people used to make fun of Arya because of the way she looked. She would be called horseface or lumpy head and things like that. But you have to remember at the time, Arya is very young, and she's a tomboy. She's always fighting with other boys, and she's always dirty and wearing raggedy clothes. But as Arya gets older, she does become a lot prettier like Lyanna, so perhaps they were both late bloomers. When Arya is at the House of Black and White, we are told that she is turning into a beautiful young lady. While Arya is there, she thinks she has no other place to go because most of her family is dead. But the kindly man she is talking to tells her she does have other options. This is what he says. "You believe this is the only place for you? You are wrong in that. You would find softer service in the household of some merchant, or you would sooner be a courtesan and have songs sung of your beauty. Speak the word and we will send you to the Black Pearl or the Daughter of the Dusk. You will sleep on rose petals and wear silken skirts that rustle when you walk, and great lords will beggar themselves for your maiden's blood. Or if it is marriage and children you desire, tell me, and we shall find a husband for you, some honest apprentice boy, a rich old man, a seafarer, whatever you desire." No one said these things to Arya when she was very young, but now that she is getting older, she is starting to change. You have to keep in mind the kindly man is a faceless man. He has seen thousands and thousands of faces, so if he thinks Arya is beautiful, then she probably is. The older and more beautiful Arya starts to become, her heart's desire may change in terms of the things that she wants in her life. Lyanna Stark probably faced these same things. When Lyanna was a little girl, she probably never thought of getting married or settling down. At the time, she probably just wanted to ride horses and train in the practice yard, just like Arya. But as she grew up and became more beautiful, she did decide she wanted other things. There are a few more comparisons in some of the other chapters. Arya is also said to ride a horse just like her Aunt Lyanna. They both ride horses like Northmen, and this shows how they are a lot alike other than just their looks. But we have already seen examples where people see Arya and they think of Lyanna. So this leads me to one of Bran's chapters in A Dance with Dragons. I find this one very interesting because the opposite actually happens this time. Bran sees Lyanna in a vision, but he immediately thinks he's looking at his sister Arya. As Bran is in the weirwood net, this is what he sees. Two children danced across the godswood, hooting at one another as they dueled with broken branches. The girl was the older and taller of the two. Arya, Bran thought eagerly, as he watched her leap up onto a rock and cut at the boy. But that couldn't be right. If the girl was Arya, then the boy was Bran himself, and he had never worn his hair so long. And Arya never beat me playing swords the way that girl is beating him. She slashed the boy across his thigh so hard that his leg went out from under him and he fell into the pool, and began to splash and shout. "You be quiet, stupid," the girl said, tossing her own branch aside. "It's just water. Do you want old Nan to hear and run tell father?" Now this is very interesting because Bran is actually seeing Lyanna and Benjen playing around and fighting. This reveals a few things besides Lyanna and Arya looking alike. This is also an example of how similar they are in other ways. We know they look alike, and we know they ride horses alike, and we know they both like to fight, and now we know they even talk the same. Lyanna told Benjen to be quiet, stupid. It's only water. Do you want old Nan to hear and run tell father? Now that sounds exactly like something Arya would say. As I have been thinking about this lately, I have been wondering if Arya's story will end in a similar fashion as Lyanna's ended. The most interesting thing of all is what is written in George R.R. Martin's original outline. Before George ever got his first book published, he sent his first 13 chapters to his friend Ralph, and he gave him the basic outline for what he planned on having the story be about. In that outline, we get a glimpse of what George wanted to have happen with Arya, and it's a perfect parallel to Lyanna's own life. Now, I do have to say that what is written in this outline has been drastically changed since then, but it's still interesting nonetheless. Plus, some of the themes have not changed. George initially wanted Jon Snow and Arya Stark to fall in love with each other, and even though this has changed, you can still see some remnants of this in George's story today. Jon and Arya are obviously the closest out of the siblings, because they are always thinking about each other, but it's not in any kind of a sexual way, as he intended at first. But in this original outline, George also wanted Tyrion to fall in love with Arya, and it says that Jon and Tyrion's relationship would turn into a deadly rivalry over Arya Stark. Now doesn't that sound a lot like Lyanna's own story? Robert and Rhaegar was willing to die for Lyanna, and it looks like George was going to have Jon and Tyrion willing to die for Arya, who is said to look and act a lot like Lyanna. Thankfully, George did change most of his plans for the story, but he did keep some of the big plot points. Jon's parents were still kept a secret, and Arya is still a lot like Lyanna. In this outline, George also stated which 5 main characters he wanted to survive the whole story, and Arya is one of those characters he planned on having live throughout everything. There is no way to know if George still intends on having Arya live or not, but he has laid out some foreshadowing about her death, so perhaps he could have Arya die at a very young age like Lyanna did. And this was something Ned did fear because he saw that wolf's blood in Arya, just like he did with Lyanna. But let's say George, or even Dan and Dave, will keep Arya alive. If Arya does live, how will her story end? Will she stay single and independent like she told her father in Season 1 and Book 1? Or will she fall in love like Lyanna did, now that she is growing up and becoming more beautiful? I know people tend to believe Arya will never settle down with someone else, but I don't think it's completely out of the question. Lyanna was a lot like Arya when they were young. Both of them did like to ride horses, get dirty, and fight. And I bet Lyanna never intended on getting married and having a kid either, although there is no way to know what she thought as a child. But I just have this feeling that before she had her first period, she probably felt a lot like Arya did. Even though Lyanna liked to do all the same things as a child, she did grow up into a beautiful young woman, and she did fall in love and have a child. Now, unfortunately, Arya has led a much darker life than Lyanna had to, so it might be harder for her to soften up and find love, but I don't think it's impossible. One of the main reasons why I ship Arya and Gendry so much is because of the parallels between Robert and Lyanna. Robert never got to have the love of his life because Lyanna chose Rhaegar over him, but Robert's son, Gendry, could be seen as the Robert 2.0, and maybe, just maybe, he can find love with Arya, who could be seen as the Lyanna 2.0. Septim Ordain always said Arya had the hands of a blacksmith. Is that George trying to tell us something or not?
We were meant to rule together. If your sister had lived, we'd have been bound by blood. Well, it's not too late. I have a son, you have a daughter. We'll join our houses.
I do want to say, when I say Arya's story could end like Lyanna's, I don't mean that Arya will die in a bed of blood just like her. I just mean in terms of her either dying young like Lyanna did, or possibly falling in love like Lyanna did. And if she happened to fall in love with Gendry, who is Robert's son, it would be even more poetic. But if I learned anything from Ramsay Bolton, it was this.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.
Let me know what you think about this idea. What do you believe will happen with Arya Stark at the end of this story? Put all your questions and thoughts down below in the comments section. I want to thank everyone for stopping by to watch the video. I really appreciate that. And I also want to thank everyone on Patreon that supports this channel. Have a great day, everyone. I'll see you soon. Bye.